Welcome to Primary Technology. We cover the biggest tech news of the week and why it matters. On today's show, the Apple Vision Pro is imminent. We're going to give a preview of CES. Microsoft put a Copilot button on its keyboard, plus launched its app. And we're going to get into some of our personal tech, including Apple's Infinite Loop store that's closing soon. This episode is brought to you by Audio Hijack by Rogue Amoeba, one of my favorite apps. You'll hear about them in a moment. And joining me, as always, is my friend Jason Aten. How's it going, Jason?
It's great, Steven. We are finally doing this for real,
We are finally doing it for real, This has been very exciting. I've been teasing it on social media, and people have been slowly finding the show because, I wanted it published everywhere before we actually launch. Stuff takes a day or two, and so people have been sharing it, posting it, and so thank you for doing that. And I'll get into, I think towards the end of the show, talk a little bit about like meta talk about the podcast, but I'll save it. We're also going to have bonus topics.
We're not talking about Facebook.
No.
I just want to be clear.
I got to be very clear. Not Facebook Meta. And we're going to have a bonus episode today as well, which you can get that by subscribing directly in Apple Podcasts or at primarytech.fm. There'll be a button there where you can sign up for a special subscriber feed. We're talking about how we met and also naming the show, which naming something is tough. I don't know if you knew that, Jason.
I mean, I have 4 kids, so yes, I'm very familiar with how tough it is to name things.
There you go. Yes, naming kids is tough. And then you think you get a unique name, and then once you name your kid that thing, I don't know about you, but I just hear the kid's name then everywhere. Like everyone named their kid that. Did you experience that with any of your kids?
And our biggest problem was we have 4 children. Well, that's not the biggest problem. But once we got to the all 4 of our children.
I'm going to put that as the teaser at the beginning of the episode. Biggest problem.
The 4 kids all have names that start with the letter M because the first 2 girls both had names that started with M. So you can't name your next kid something totally different because then it's like, was he adopted? Why does his name different? Like, what is the problem here? So once you get to 2, you have to stick with it. And so then by the 4th kid, we're like, what names that start with M do we still like? And that's your name. So there you go.
Monsieur. Yeah. We call you Monsieur Aten.
Exactly.
All right, let's get into this. So we're going to do some quick news bits at the top of the show every week. And then we have a couple big topics, namely Apple Vision Pro and CES. Actually already have follow-up from our first episode, and then we'll talk about our personal tech at the end. So first up, Humane. Every time I mention Humane on social media, it's hilarious because everyone's like, this thing is going to flop. But they now have a commercial, and I watched the commercial. It's on YouTube, and I'll put a link in the podcast show notes, of course. And this commercial is like, it has all these like quote-unquote like just normal people living their life also wearing the AI pin. And it's kind of hilarious because there's even this party on the rooftop of some building, and you see these like young people all talking, and like they're all wearing an AI pin. I was like, this future by Humane is quite unique. But I just want to say I'm getting one. Like I have one on the way. Supposedly they launch in March. Humane has said they were like early next year when the pre-order started, and now they're like, well, March. I'm hoping this thing actually ships. I think it will. I have one coming. And, I'm extremely skeptical. Like your article said, we'll put a link to this Inc. article in the show notes. It basically is going to do everything a phone and watch does, but just kind of worse. But it's new tech, and I'm excited about new tech to try it. Did you pre-order one? Like, they didn't give any journalists any, pre or early access to this thing, but did you pre-order one with the, intention to write about it?
No, I did not. And it was even weirder than what you said because they actually did invite some journalists to a briefing to talk about it or to their launch event, but they didn't invite any reviewers. Joanna Stern wasn't there. The people who would normally, and in fact, there was a big thing where some people were invited and then uninvited at the last minute. So it is very,
I think, from the Verge.
I think you're right. I think they went and just waited and then was like, oh, sorry, you're out of luck. So, but the reason I wrote about it was simply because when you watch this commercial, which actually is not new, the fact I saw it on TV over the weekend and that was new. But what was interesting to me is it's basically telling you all the things you can do on any Google phone or any iPhone right now. It's just way more awkward because it's like this, you have to keep touching your chest to get it to do things. And the premise of my thing was what the perfect accessory for all of those things is? It already exists. It's a watch, right? It's an accessory to your phone. Yeah. So I don't know. I think it's really novel and interesting. The commercial makes me feel like you aren't telling the story you think you are. So
the 2 things I find somewhat compelling, and I think the story that Humane is trying to say is, hold your phone less, be on your phone less. And there's a couple like trying to play music on a city street with an ink display. I don't see that happening. But anyway, when the mom is like, or the lady saying, capture this moment, and she's looking at her baby, I think taking her first steps, like she doesn't have to have her face behind a phone. She can look with her eyeballs at her child, and then the pin is capturing it. How is framing and how good is that going to be? Like where you have it placed on your clothing, if you wear the AI pin on your leg, what kind of video is that going to capture? I don't know. So like, I understand the idea. Like you can still look with your eyeballs and still capture the moment, but not be kind of engrossed in a device. And those young people like talking on a rooftop, they ask the pin for something, and it's like, it would feel nice if you could all like look at each other in the face and still do something with a piece of tech that doesn't like disengage you from the people around you by pulling out your phone. But I don't know. It's I don't know. We'll see.
I just think it's not doing anything that you can't already do, and it's doing those things worse because it doesn't have a screen.
Yeah,
so like you just what is that camera? What is the capturing of that kid? And if it's capturing everything in the room, it's a pretty wide angle lens, which means it's probably a garbage photo. Like anyway, I don't know. I just thought the commercial was. I'm watching this in a basketball game, and I still don't think I want one.
Well, I'm getting one. I'm taking the L for everybody. I bought one, and we'll see. It still feels a little bit like that cooler on Kickstarter that never shipped. They had like a built-in blender and everything. Like we'll see if this actually comes out. But also, Samsung is having their event later this month. Samsung S24 Unpacked events happening on January 17th. Did you say you were going to this thing?
I have. Yeah, they are doing an in-person event in I think San Jose. So I am planning on going to see what they're actually. I mean, it's the reason is because they're sort of promoting it as like the first AI phone, which is funny because I feel like Google has used that before. I think there are a lot of phone companies that would argue that there's a lot of AI, whatever that means, built into their phones already. But I think it'll be interesting to see what Samsung's take on this is.
And we'll see the new S24 phone lineup, which looks like it's going to be very similar to the S23. I don't know if you watched MKBHD's like smartphone awards, but he does think highly of the Galaxy phones. I'm curious, like I'm coming from a basically all Apple bubble, now trying to expand my coverage and ideas about technology to all these companies. And I know you're like an Apple guy kind of first. How do you approach like this S24? Like, are you going to get an S24 and like write about it, or do you just kind of ignore things like this? Like, how do you decide what to cover?
Yeah, I mean, I don't ignore them. I have covered. I mean, I actually just thought about this morning. I have a Fold sitting right here, and it's. I mean, and that's fine. And I've reviewed several of the Galaxy phones. The thing that's difficult for me is, the cameras are great. The software is Android plus whatever Samsung does to it. They're good Android phones. Like I have no problem recommending them to someone who says what I really want is an Android phone. The hard thing for me personally is that I don't really want to give up using my iPhone for 3 weeks, which is what it really takes to review a phone. I'm just
right.
And the reason is it's funny because I don't want to mess up like all my messages, and I don't want to mess up all that kind of stuff. I mean, like it would just be a pain. So I do have a second SIM that I use for this purpose. But again, unless you make something your primary device, you're not really reviewing it in the same way. So I do try really hard to like. That's why I have this here. I carry it around to try to do things with it. But I don't actually use it as a daily driver ever because it's just so it doesn't work with all of the things I have set up in the ecosystem already. So
what you're saying is.
Yeah,
because
blue bubbles
it doesn't
matter.
have iMessage.
That's actually
have blue bubbles. Yeah,
that's actually probably true. To be honest, that might be the single biggest reason. And I've never really thought of it that way. But I can put Spark on it. I mean, I have Spark on it, which is my email app. I can put Pocket Casts or Spotify. I put all those things on there. I can Slack. I can pretty closely mimic it. The only other apps that I can't get on it are like Ulysses, which is what I write in. But for the most part, I could get pretty close, but the messaging really would mess it up for me. But think about it this way. If I was thinking of switching to Android, that would be less of a big deal to me. The reason is I don't want to have a 3-week chunk where everything just got totally jacked up. That's my reason.
Right. And, I've seen Joshua Topolsky really hammering Apple and iMessage on Threads and talking about how there have been people who will switch from iPhone to Android but all the people that had them in their phone in iMessage conversations, it's sometimes hard to tell, am I messaging their email address because that was like the default iMessage endpoint, or was it their phone number? And there'll be people who have switched from iPhone to Android saying we lost like weeks and months of messages. That is a legitimate issue. Like I totally get that. But I am also like you. Like I have a Google Pixel, and I had thought about doing a video like I use a Google Pixel for 3 weeks. And I'm like, no, iMessage is one, but also like you're saying, the apps, like Ulysses is a big one for you. For me, the calendar on Android, I still could not like. Fantastical is so good on the iPhone, and I have it like just so nailed down with my calendar sets and my focus modes. I've not found a calendar equivalent on Android. And I think like things and reminders, like all of those things that are part of the Apple ecosystem. And now like iCloud Keychain, I've been leaning more on that in the last few months than on 1Password, and there's no equivalent on Android. You can get Windows, you can get the browser extension if you want to use Chrome on Windows and iCloud Keychain. You can even get Apple Music on Android. That app is there. I still kind of wish Apple Podcasts would come to Android for like the subscription side, but that switching cost is getting harder and harder. Whether that's criticism or whatnot, but I don't know. For me, it's getting harder. So
I will tell you, I'm going to save you some time. Don't make the video. I already wrote that article and no one cared. I wrote about giving up my iPhone and my MacBook for a Google Pixel, and some Windows computer that I had at the time that I was reviewing. And nobody cared. No one cared.
Nobody cared.
Nobody cared.
I did experience that. I made a video on the Pixel 8 camera, and like that's one of my lowest performing videos of last year. So I was like, okay, I guess this is not a thing.
What I learned is that no one is interested in my experience of doing that because everyone is just sticking with what they have. So.
That's good. That's a good point. All right, a couple other quick news. DHH, who is with Hey, they have submitted a new app to the App Store called Hey Calendar, Hey email app, which came out about 2.5 years ago, and there was a big kerfuffle, if I could use that word, on the 30% App Store cut because they just wanted the people to be able to sign up in the app, and of course, if people were going to pay in the app for the Hey email service, they were going to take 30%. Apple's going to take 30%. There was a big thing. I think that even went, not this particular case went to court, but I think eventually there was the court case, the Epic v. Apple, where Apple at least now has to allow you a link, or developers are at least allowed a link from their app out to their website for people to sign up, which is still not a great experience, but it helps developers not have to pay the 30%, let people sign up outside the app. But now this Hey Calendar app, a new app from Hey, has been rejected from the App Store. And DHH, David Heinemeier Hansen, which I interviewed on the Apple Insider podcast, and who did you interview again?
I interviewed Jason Fried, the other co-founder, for a piece on Inc. when this all happened, because really it was, they had created a service, right? Hey existed as a service, and they wanted to give their customers the ability to access it on their iPhones. They were releasing it as an iPhone app, and Apple at the time said you cannot submit this app without offering in-app purchase, because someone could theoretically download this app and not know what to do because they don't already have a Hey account. So you have to make it possible for them to create an account. And they ended up getting around that by making that possible, but you still can't actually like pay for an account in there. You can just create like a free trial essentially, but then you have to go to the website. I think that this is still true. And the Hey Calendar is actually just another layer of the same service. They're just offering it as a separate app. I don't know why they're offering it as a separate app. That seems kind of strange to me, like if you're having these two things combined. But yeah, it was a big deal then. To be clear, DHH doesn't say why. Apple hasn't said why they rejected it, right? Like there isn't anything clear about why. They didn't say the reason we're rejecting this. It just sort of lends more fuel to the complaint that Apple is not always transparent about this sort of thing. And then by the time you find out what's going on, it's like, oh yeah, we want some more money.
Right. So DHH is one to not be quiet about this. And so he will be on social media, and you could probably follow the entire saga there. I know Casey Liss, who made the Call Sheet app, we talked about that in our first bonus episode as one of our favorite apps for 2023. He had talked about how the App Store rejected his app initially, which shows you like movie information, actors, and all that kind of stuff, because of the images of movies, specifically Pixar movies, that were showing up in the app. And there was some weird App Store rule that you couldn't like display that for copyright or whatever. And he was like, but this is a movie app. Like, I'm not using this image. This is actually also coming from, I think, the movie database that he's using to power his app. And that was one of those cases where I think he actually got on the phone with someone eventually after several weeks or several months. So we'll see how this actually shakes out, whether this is actually about the 30% cut. But, DHH, he's going to be out there talking about it. So
yes, which means we're going to know. We're going to know what's going on. So
we will know what's going on.
Yep.
Yeah. And so, all right, last piece of news before we get to CES and Vision Pro. Microsoft Copilot, which the app came out for iPhone, I think last week, and I actually downloaded it because Microsoft Copilot is Microsoft's like AI tool powered by ChatGPT, and I was like, let me try this because I have the GPT app on my phone mainly to use the shortcuts action, and sometimes that shortcuts action is a little buggy. So I was like, let me download Copilot, see how that is, and it's basically just another way to interact with ChatGPT. There's no shortcuts actions with the Copilot app for the iPhone, but you can use ChatGPT 4 without having a GPT Plus account if you wanted to try that. I think that's one of the major benefits of the app on the iPhone if you wanted to try it. But now, Microsoft is putting a Copilot key on its keyboard, which if you ever used a Windows PC, there's that Windows button, which I believe is the start menu that's the default behavior on a Windows PC. And now it's going to be the Copilot. And yeah, that's kind of a big change.
Well, and they used to have two Windows buttons, right? One on either side. And
one on each side.
A couple, was it 5 years ago? They changed one of them to the Office button, which whatever.
Really?
Yeah,
I didn't even know.
I don't know what it does because I try not to use a Windows computer. I mean, I generally I review them sometimes, but again, I have the same problem as Android. It's like I can't even set up all the apps that I use, so it's sort of hard. Right. But I mean, and that isn't to say there are some very good Windows computers, and actually Windows itself makes some very good computers. I should say that, but it is sort of interesting. They are so all in on this that they are, literally replacing a button that's been there for like 30 years with a different button. Whether it does the same thing, I mean, in spirit, it probably is meant to, if you push the Windows button before, it was like find a thing on my computer, right? Like it would bring up the start menu, you could search for things, you could do whatever. So now it's like you're just going to type the same thing in natural language. So that doesn't necessarily feel that weird. It's just you're making a physical change to a piece of hardware that always comes with pretty high stakes. And in the article that you are showing that we will link in here, it talks about how like Microsoft's partners, like OEM manufacturers, are planning to add this button as well. So like it's a pretty significant change. They're baking it in, and you have to think like they're doing this. They're baking it in so like there's no going back. This is like a burn the ships moment for Microsoft. It's like we're gonna put this. I mean, we're literally putting a button on the keyboard. They only change that every 30 years or whatever. It's here to stay. So at least they think it is.
It's interesting. It's interesting, too, because I thought as we enter 2024 that AI, like in the conversation, would be less prevalent. 2023 was everywhere. ChatGPT early in the year really kind of pushed that to the forefront of everybody's mind. And it felt like towards the end of the year, people were getting tired of it. I tried doing several videos about AI, and it was like nobody cared anymore. But now it seems like the Galaxy Unpacked event is going to be of the huge AI focus. Microsoft literally putting a Copilot button on their keyboard. Feels like we might get another surge of this. And I'm also thinking WWDC from Apple's perspective really feels like they'll need to do something. They've now said AI, like the word, several times. Johnny Cerrugi said it at the M3 event, and Tim Cook even said AI several times with his interview with Doja Cat. And he talked about how like the Apple keyboard is their AI, which I mean, I get it. I
a little bit of a reach, but
a little bit of a reach. But I do think at WWDC this year, we need to see something in regards to Siri, which I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, the last couple of WWDCs, there's not really been a Siri focus. I think early days of Siri, there were literally parts of the DubDub event where they would say, new actions or hooks for developers to be able to plug in like things and other calendar apps, would get more direct access. And it felt like after that kind of initial few years of developers really getting their hands into be able to use certain parts of Siri, we never got anything else. I remember I was waiting for years of like, can I ask, maybe I should stop saying it because it's going to keep triggering everybody's devices. So sorry, everybody.
Everybody's podcast is already paused because...
Yeah, exactly. But I was waiting for the day when I was using Pocket Cast as my default listening app to be able to use the digital assistant on my iPhone to play a podcast in that app, which you can do, again, like you can do a task or to do in Things, a third-party app, because there's that literal Siri integration, the API, but they never, like they didn't keep opening it up to people. And now you can do, I see a lot of TikToks and Reels where people are like just talking to the ChatGPT app because the ChatGPT voice tool is like really good. And there's even this one video, I'll try to find it, but there's this lady who's like, she has this 1-minute question about, she's basically asking about like currency exchanges. Like, why is the money in the U.S. different than the money in other places? Why is it different numbers? She has this long question that any normal human would probably be like, what are you saying? And ChatGPT like gets it, understands what she's asking. ChatGPT was like, it thinks like I think you're asking about currency exchanges. And there's lots of factors that go into that. And it's like, wow, okay.
Yep.
This did better than probably any other voice assistant could on the market. And so it does feel like Apple needs to do something this year. I don't know. How do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, and I think the last time I really remember hearing much about Siri was when they built that big set for, I think it was the HomePod minis maybe, and they just did a lot of the demos about things you could just shout into the air and have it, you know, unlock your car or whatever, like just all these different things. That was the last time I really remember them spending any amount of time. I don't remember if that was, I think that was WWDC, but I honestly don't really remember. So it has been a while, and it's almost, I feel like, I have no information, that they've sort of let it lay kind of low for a little bit because they did not have a direct, like especially this past year, because they did not have a direct answer to the, are you building a large language model? Are you going to incorporate this into your voice assistant? They didn't really want to have to answer those questions yet. And so they didn't say much of anything about it, right? So I think that as they start to build that out, and there are a lot of reports that Apple is working on that sort of thing, I think that there's a better chance that we'll hear more about it. And the fact that they did talk about it specifically in terms of the MacBook Pro, that it is a device designed to be able to do this sort of thing. And by do this sort of thing, I mean like people who are developing these large language models can use these machines to do a lot of the tasks that they do. I have no idea what those are, but they told me that it was a good thing for that. So if I ever get into that, I've got the right computer. But in the meantime, I'm just as entertained by it all as you are. And I think that as Apple starts to build that out, if they release their own, if they have a big upgrade to Siri where it doesn't stink anymore, right, then I think that we'll start to hear about it again. Because that's really what Apple does. If they don't have anything to say about it, they just don't say anything about it. They are not going to be, you know, persuaded by anyone else. So,
and I do think Apple is uniquely positioned to use an AI tool like this with their iWork suite, obviously in Final Cut, in Xcode for autofilling things for developers, even just something simple as, let's say you have a bullet point list in Notes or Pages. To select those, ask Apple's AI assistant to make some keynote slides based on that info, format it nicely, maybe even pull in some random imagery, like Apple's great at imagery, like we see it at every event or whatever. Like just little tools like that, I think would raise the value of the iWork suite, which I love all their, like I use Keynote and Pages, but I know most places it's like, it's all Microsoft, it's all Office. And so I think some of those other benefits might make people want to at least try it, you know, test it out, just like they did with ChatGPT. But before we get to the other big topics, tell me, because I didn't realize this, you told me right before the show started, that the New York Times is suing Microsoft over this?
So they're suing OpenAI and Microsoft, actually. So they it's a pretty big deal, and it's basically a copyright infringement. And I actually read, it's like 69 pages long, 70 pages long, plus hundreds of thousands of pages of exhibits, because there's all these examples of where they asked ChatGPT to spit out an article on a topic, and it was pretty close to what the New York Times would have done. And so the New York Times like basically just is claiming that not only is this copyright infringement because they don't have any permission to ingest all of their content, right? The New York Times has essentially made all of its content that it's ever produced, right, back, 100 and some years, available as an archive online. And so that's all available to be ingested, and it was. And so they're talking about how it's diluting their brand, because if someone produces an article that sounds like the New York Times sort of, but is making stuff up, then that's bad, right? And it's also
it's bad.
It's really expensive to be the New York Times, right? And journalism in general is really expensive. So there's sort of this like dilution. It will be interesting because I think it has the potential to answer some of the really most complicated questions, which is is it okay for these large language models to just suck in all of the content that's ever been created for the purpose of training these models? I think it'll be, I'm not a lawyer. I have no idea what the outcome is going to be, but it is definitely going to be interesting. I definitely spent a day reading this because it's a lawsuit and I'm not a lawyer, so it takes me longer, but I'm glad that I did because it's going to be really interesting. So,
and this is something Nilay Patel on The Verge has been talking about for probably the last 2 years, that like lawsuits are coming. Like this is what it means, that people who make like original content, especially people like the New York Times and other like journalists, news people, like this is going to be an issue of like just AI generated content and all that. So it's happening, as the GIF says.
It is happening.
So we got two big topics. I want to talk about CES, and I think both of us are on the fence of going. I think one of us might be going. Anyway, we'll talk about that, and also the Vision Pro, which is imminent. But before we do, I'm so excited to tell you that even on this first inaugural launch episode, we already had that kind of other episode, but this is like the real, like the main first one. We have a sponsor, and this sponsor is one of my favorite companies and apps ever, which is Rogue Amoeba, and they make the applications Audio Hijack, Loopback, Farrago, all of that. Let me talk to you about Audio Hijack because Jason and I are literally using Audio Hijack right now. Right now, as you listen to this, it is Audio Hijack recording it to our Macs. And how long have you used Audio Hijack, Jason? Has it been a minute?
Probably when I first started to podcast, which I guess was, so it's been like 2 or 3 years. So not as long as some people, but it definitely has been a game changer for me.
Been a game changer. I've been using it for years and years. I literally use Audio Hijack every day. If I'm recording audio for one of my videos on YouTube, I have Audio Hijack sitting in my menu bar, which is a great feature of Audio Hijack. You can just have a little symbol in the menu bar. You can start running one of your sessions, and you can set up multiple sessions. I have one for recording this podcast. I have a session for recording my video. And even if it's just going from a mic to a little meter, the meters can show up in the menu bar, and then I can record that to an uncompressed WAV or MP3. Extremely powerful recording, and they've been adding a ton of new features as well. You can live stream from Audio Hijack if you want to send live audio to something like YouTube. They've even added a transcription feature, and Audio Hijack is really easy to build a chain of events. These little blocks, you drag them in, you connect the blocks, and you can actually transcribe audio with one of those blocks. You can add things like EQ and compressor, audio effects. It is an extremely powerful audio application. So if you do anything with audio, recording it, making videos, if you want to start a podcast, Audio Hijack is the app to get. And they also have great apps like Loopback. I actually use Audio Hijack in conjunction with Loopback for a couple scenarios. My brother-in-law has a complicated like video podcast setup with a Scarlett, like an Aten i20. And in order to get all the audio to go to the right places, I actually use Loopback, creating virtual audio devices where you can really control the chain of audio across your Mac. It is an incredible tool, highly recommend. And because they're our inaugural launch sponsor, highly recommend. You should just go flood their, you can't really like sell out of a digital product, but I guess you could just to take out their servers just because everyone goes downloads Audio Hijack to try it. And there's actually a special deal. I'm so excited because I get to read a custom URL with our name on the end. Thanks, Paul. So here's what you do. Through the end of January, you have all this month. You can save $20 on Audio Hijack and any of the bundles from Rogue Amoeba. You go to the website macaudio.com/primarytech. That's our URL, macaudio.com/primarytech. And use the promo code PrimaryTech, all one word, to save $20 on Audio Hijack and any of their bundles. macaudio.com/PrimaryTech. Use the promo code PrimaryTech, and you can save $20. That link and the promo code is also in the show notes. You could just click it there. Our thanks to Rogue Amoeba and Audio Hijack for sponsoring this episode. Man, I'm excited. It's fun.
Listen, I want to say one thing about Audio Hijack that maybe, because I think some people might have heard that and been like, that sounds a little complicated, and it does sound complicated because it can do a lot of things. But I just want to give like a real world scenario. I had a conversation with someone who is a teacher, and this teacher still does like the virtual school. There are still students who do virtual school even post COVID. Like that's a lot of districts have offered that. and they wanted to record the audio from their lessons and that kind of thing. And Zoom does such a terrible job of recording the audio that they started using audio hijack, because essentially what it does is it lets you take any input source into your computer and essentially send it wherever you want. So like you can have a microphone and you can say, yeah, send that to Zoom because they need to hear me, but also send it to this file and then send it to a pair of headphones. And like, it just gives you, and it's very visual and lets you set up these blocks. And so
yes,
not saying anything negative towards this particular teacher person, but they aren't necessarily the most tech savvy, but they were able to figure it out because they were able to just like move blocks around, and it just did it. So I wanted like people who are listening to this to know that like this is a great tool, even if you're not a podcaster.
That is so good. Thank you for sharing that. Wonderful. Links in the podcast show notes. Thank you, Rogue Amoeba and Audio Hijack. All right, CES is next week as we record. It's the big consumer electronics show. I have never been to CES. Tell me, Jason, how many, if ever, have you been to CES?
I think I've been to 4 CESs.
Oh, my goodness.
I think I've been to 4 of them. 4. So, yeah.
4 CESs. Listen, I was so close. I mean, as we record, I mean, there's still a chance. I was like, I've never been to CES. Now that I've been more on YouTube, there's been like a bunch of people kind of messaging me like, hey, you going to be at CES? Like, let's get together, like content creators. And I'm like, I wasn't going to go. And then I'm like, let me just see. Because you can register with CES to be like a media where I guess you don't have to pay the registration fee. Is that accurate? Like you kind of go for free. You just have to get there.
Yeah.
And so I was like late, I think it was Monday night or whatever. I was like, let me see if they'll accept me as media. And they did. So I'm like registered to go. I have no plane ticket, no intention of going. That might change by the end of this podcast. But are you going? Like, are you going this year? Have you decided?
So here's the thing. I'm probably in the opposite, like the situation as you. I'll explain in just a second. I do want to say CES, the interesting thing about it is you have to be an industry person, right? You can't just as a consumer buy a ticket to CES. You have to be, and I don't know all the ways they define industry people who work for big tech companies, big whatever companies, people who are like analysts, people who are buyers of different things, all that kind of stuff. So it's like a very industry focused event, but it is where a lot of the consumer technology comes from. And yes, as a media, that's one of the categories. But I think people pay like thousands of dollars to go to this if they're a part of these different categories of people. And I would never pay that much money because it is 170,000 people in Vegas, which is just a little bit overwhelming. I mean, it's huge. It takes place at the Las Vegas Convention Center, which is massive, but it also takes place at like the Venetian and the Aria and all these different places and stuff. And so I've gone several times, including 2020, right before COVID. And anyone who tells you that COVID came in March, I promise you it came to CES. Like, it's got to be how it came. I mean, there's 170,000 people from all over the world. I came home and was sick for like 3 days, which is pretty typical after leaving Vegas, but that was especially bad. But anyway, I have a ticket. I have tickets, a plane ticket. I have a hotel, all that kind of stuff. But there is a part of me that's like, do I want to go again? Because I know how much it is definitely one of those things for someone in our industry that should do it at least once, right? But it is also one of those things where it's like, do I need to do it again? And for me, the thing I measure is the time and investment and energy that it takes to go. Is that worth what I'll be covering? And could I cover some of that stuff without going? And so that's always the trade-off. And in the past, I've had some great, opportunities to connect with people. I've been at different sessions. I've covered different things. It is a good experience. I'm just like, you have no ticket except for your pass and you're trying to decide to go. I have everything booked and I'm trying to decide if I'm still going to go.
So our follow-up next week, one of us might be podcasting from CES. We'll see. I mean, I'm probably not going to go this year, but I do want to go because I remember, I started following tech news like back when Joshua Topolsky, Nilay, and Paul Miller were at Engadget. Joanna Stern was there. This is like 2006-07 time. And CES was always such a fun event to follow from a distance because there did seem to be like major announcements. Big tech companies were saying, big thing. I think we saw phones at CES back then, not Apple,
right?
But other companies. Yeah.
Right.
And so, CES is in recent years, it's felt a little less so, although because I do love like smart home and HomeKit stuff, we do see those kinds of devices at HomeKit. And, in a moment, I'd love to hear like what you expect to see at CES. But HomeKit stuff, I actually have even had, I don't know how much of this I can say, but I've actually had a couple briefings already. Because like there were a lot of companies. I guess they are very sensitive to the fact that a lot of journalists and tech creators are not going to CES, but they're going to make announcements there. So they were like, "Hey, we can give you a video call briefing in the middle of December. Just don't talk about it until January something when we launch it." So have you had some of those? Are you allowed to say? Not who?
I mean, yes, and I actually checked this morning. It's totally fine to say you've had embargoed briefings as long as you don't say who they were with.
You'll say who or for what, yeah.
But I did check this morning because we had this on here, and so I practice inbox zero, not religiously, but by the end of the week, I want everything out of my inbox, right?
Right.
So in my inbox alone, so that's like since the beginning of this week, I checked this morning, and I have about 268
oh my goodness
emails from people wanting to set up briefings. I will not do 268 briefings. I might not even go, but I will say that has been one of the most valuable reasons for going. Yeah, it's fun to walk the trade show floor. That's the part that everyone should probably do at least once. You see all the big TVs, like that's the biggest booths that are there are like LG and Samsung and TCL.
They got like foldable TVs that curve and
the roll up TVs. They've got all these different things there. Yeah, and that's great. Like it's very, very cool to see all that kind of stuff.
Right.
After a while, it does sort of seem pretty much the same.
Right.
And so for me, like I look at the briefings and I'm like, will I actually write about this? And even if it's cool, if I'm not going to write about it, it's like, I'm not going to waste your time. I don't have time for this. So
right. So I'm excited about two things. One is smart home stuff, which this was announced publicly, but UTech, I believe is the brand, actually announced a thread over Matter lock, which would work with Apple Home and Home Key. And I recently did a bunch of home key lock comparisons on my YouTube channel. And there's really 4 locks in the U.S. that work with home key, which is not a huge selection. So it's nice to see another one. And now that Matter over Home Key or Matter over Thread is a thing for locks on Apple Home, maybe we'll see more of those and just other devices at CES. And the other big one is Qi 2, which is the next wireless charging standard. Qi 2 is based on MagSafe. And of all my videos last year, for some reason, MagSafe and wireless charging were like the biggest videos for some reason. And like my video talking about why Apple killed the MagSafe battery pack and the MagSafe Duo was my highest viewed video last year. I don't know, like I didn't expect that. I find it fascinating, but I do know that we will see Qi 2 announcements at CES, and so I'm excited for that. But what do you expect to see? What are you excited about seeing?
Yeah, well, I mean, I already mentioned TVs. That's a big part. Like that is the big thing that gets announced at CES, right? There are not a lot of computers announced, not a lot of smartphones announced, that sort of thing is not nearly as, because all those companies do their own events, right? But TVs, there's like a whole convention center full of televisions, and it is kind of cool. I like a nice TV. We have like the LG G1 or something like that. It's just a nice OLED TV, whatever. So I don't even know the name. We've already established I'm not good with names. I got my 4 children named and that's it. But anyway, I can't remember other people's names. But there is also often a lot of cool car technology, right? That's starting to become more of a thing, especially as it relates to electric vehicles, chargers, that kind of stuff is pretty cool. And then there's a lot of media. I was at the Quibi announcement. I mentioned this to you like back in 2020, which I mean, amazing. Talk about bad timing. They like literally announced a product that you would use when you're out on the go and have like 5 minutes, and then everyone had to stay home for a year. Like they never had a chance. But anyway, I don't think it would. Did you try it? Did you try Quibi? Oh yeah, they didn't have a chance. Anyway, but talk about terrible timing. Like if they were going to have a chance, COVID was not it.
Yes.
So
fair.
Anyway, I mean, it was a bad idea anyway, but it was a bad idea that was given a very bad set of circumstances to try to, it's like a baby bird with no wings got pushed out of the nest to see if it could fly. Like it had zero chance.
I'm not here to defend Quibi by any means, but I will say the idea. So if you didn't know, Quibi, it was a video streaming service with the intention of vertical video being the primary medium, high quality vertical video, which is different. Like vertical video today is like TikTok Reels and YouTube Shorts, which there are some highly produced ones, but it's more so like kind of just raw, like maybe even low quality videos. And that's kind of the allure sometimes, depending on the creator. But Quibi was going to like make shows that you could watch vertically and it would make sense and look good, but you could also rotate your device, watch it in normal widescreen, and it would also be formatted that way. So like if you were watching an interview, if you were holding your device vertically, you could see one person in the interview. If you flipped your device sideways, you can see like both people because it's widescreen. And like that idea that you could create one piece of content that could be consumed at any rotation and it actually look good, like it was like on purpose, I think is an interesting idea, but it is obviously very difficult to execute. And I think you probably need like creators and YouTubers to be able to do that, and that was not going to be something accessible to them. Like this was going to be a streaming service. So I don't know. Yeah.
Well, and just to be clear, like not only what you just described, which is absolutely true, but you could have the vertical be, let's say you're making a horror show, like a 6-minute horror show, could be like the POV version of it, like the person, like the protagonist version. But then when you flipped it widescreen, you would be looking third person at so you could have completely independent like streams of content depending on which way, which is definitely interesting. They spent a ton of money to acquire, like Steven Spielberg was attached to a show, right? And this was Jeffrey Katzenberg who like made the Little Mermaid. Like he was the head of Disney Studios and then DreamWorks. And Meg Whitman was the CEO from, I guess eBay and HP are her two claims to fame. So like it was not for a lack of trying. But anyway, so that's the other big thing that oftentimes we see at CES are big media related things. Sometimes you'll see like last year, Delta Airlines had a big push while they were there. So you see these big companies that will show up when they have a thing that they want to get out in front of people. And that's cool. Do I expect anything revolutionary to happen? No, I think that the biggest product that's going to happen this year is what we'll talk about next, and that's not going to be at CES. What is interesting at CES, I do expect to be true, is a lot of companies try to get out whatever they think Apple's going to do before Apple does it, and they realize all the oxygen has been sucked out of the room. This is true because Apple doesn't announce things at CES. No, they did have their head of privacy was there in 2020, sitting on a stage with the head of policy from Facebook, which is a really interesting conversation. And they were talking about privacy, but that was the last time that Apple has sent somebody, I think, to actually present at CES.
I am curious if we're going to see headset. I mean, obviously the Meta Quest is like the big headset. It's already out.
Yep.
And so I'd be curious, like any other company that's going to make a headset, I imagine it's just going to be for show. And they have to make like some kind of audacious hardware claim because they're not going to have the ecosystem or whatever. But AI headsets, weird tech. I'm here for it. I wouldn't mind seeing it. But, well, you let me know if you go. When are you going to decide? Are you going to decide like Sunday afternoon? Like when are you going to go?
Yeah, my flight is supposed to leave Sunday afternoon, so I should decide before that. I probably will know. Actually, I have decided I'm not going to go on Sunday. If I go, it will be a little bit later in the week. Okay. So, but I probably will know by the time people listen to this, I probably will have decided for sure. What I mean to say is by the time people listen to this, I probably will have canceled my ticket. My plane ticket.
And maybe I'll have bought a ticket. I don't know.
There you go.
I literally have mine.
Can I just sell mine to you? Does it work that way? Can I sell mine to you?
Well, I don't know. You flying Delta? You gonna fly Delta?
I am flying Delta. That's true.
Well, anyway, I don't know. I think I'm just gonna put the pass in my Apple Wallet app to feel like to have a little less FOMO. Just feel like I'm part of CES, and then I'll just watch all the coverage from my home office.
Yeah, I mean, if you follow like the live blog from The Verge, you'll probably get most of the information.
See, that's the thing. That's the thing. All right. Yep. The other big topic, of course, is Apple Vision Pro. And it seems like even rumors and Mark Gurman, the seemingly omniscient Mark Gurman, is saying that January 26th is a floating date that we might hear maybe an announcement. I just saw an Apple Newsroom article, like notification on my Mac. I was like, Vision Pro? No, it's Apple Fitness Plus offers more ways to work out and meditations. Never mind. Just want to make sure I didn't miss anything in that Apple Newsroom article. Okay. Mark Gurman saying January 26th, so we could, as early as the end of this month, January 2024, at least have an announcement, maybe an event. I know I've heard rumblings that the retail staff is being trained, that certain retail staff are actually being like flown out to Cupertino to be trained on how to train other staff, and then they'll be like sent back to their regions and do things there. I'm very excited. Do you think there's going to be like a launch event? Like, is Apple going to do a virtual event to talk more about Vision Pro? Is this going to be like press release? How do you think this is going to go?
You know, they already announced it, obviously, at WWDC, and they did briefing, hands-on, not just briefings, hands-on demonstrations, about a half an hour long, where you actually sat and got to use the Vision Pro. And I don't know how many people that was. I think it was probably less than 1,000. I really don't have a way of gauging that, but it was not everyone that was at WWDC had an opportunity. But then they started to do their developer things. I think it might have been you that I heard mention that they were sending out emails to developers like, get ready for Vision OS. And that was a thing that usually happens just before they actually launch a product, like get ready for iOS 17 and it's coming in a couple of weeks or something like that. So it does seem pretty obvious. I can't remember where I said this, and I'm not trying to lay down like I told you so points, but my guess was they would try to coordinate it somewhat closely to the 40th anniversary of the original Mac, which is January 24th, right? And so the 26th would be close enough to say, like, 40 years ago we launched the most revolutionary personal computing device, and then we did the same thing, however many years ago, and now we're doing it again, kind of thing. I do think that there will be some kind of an event, even if it's similar to the Mac Pro Scary Fast event, where they do a pre-recorded keynote thing. They fly people to, they don't fly people. They offer, you can come, fly yourself, get here.
You can fly yourself.
I want to be real clear about that. You can come. We will let you in the building if your name is on this list, but get here. People will go to maybe New York or to Cupertino or maybe multiple places. I'm not really sure. And do some kind of a thing. I think that they want the profile to be big enough where it's sort of a moment because this is, like, they're betting a lot on this. This doesn't feel like Apple TV where it's a hobby, and if it doesn't work out, that's cool. Right. I think Tim Cook is very in on spatial computing. That's the sense that I get.
I am, like, this feels wild. Like, when the Apple Watch was launched, it was clear that this is a new product category for Apple. It wasn't a new product category in general. Like, there were smartwatches before that. Right. But it did feel like this Apple Watch is now going to bring smartwatches and wearable devices to the masses. And this is now going to be it wasn't with the first generation Apple Watch, maybe even not the second. I think Series 3 is when it finally became a little more ubiquitous. You started seeing just like normal people wearing Apple Watches. Like, that was a clear moment to say, now smartwatches and wearables are a thing, and Apple makes the thing. Just like AirPods was kind of the wireless headphone revolution. Like, yes, there were Bluetooth headphones before. They looked funny and didn't sound very good, but AirPods was like, now this is an industry, and now we have Pixel Buds and all this kind of stuff, Samsung, whatever. Vision Pro is obviously, like, Apple is obviously positioning Vision Pro to be that for AR, VR, and spatial computing, that this product, even though there have been headsets before, is going to now open the door to the masses, and this is going to be a thing. And I am extremely excited to try it. You have actually tried it, so I'm curious how you feel this is going to go. But I feel like this is going to be a harder sell than wearables like the Apple Watch, much harder sell than AirPods, not just because of the cost. There will be cheaper versions of headsets, maybe Vision Air, Vision, no name, no moniker, just Apple Vision, I don't know. So there'll be cheaper headsets and it'll be more accessible in the future. But to say that this is now going to, like, 3 years from now, change it where spatial computing is ubiquitous or at least more common, I'm very curious. I mean, you have tried this. I'm obviously going to get one. I want to know what it's going to feel like. Will I work in VR? Like, yes, obviously I'll probably watch movies there because it's going to be the best looking thing, most immersive. But, like, am I going to spend hours in a headset with some windows around? Like, I don't know. How do you feel about this?
Well, first I have a question, and my question is, do you envision that at some point in your life you will wear the Vision Pro and the Humane AI Pin at the same time? And if so, will you promise that you will never leave your house like that?
So in my mind, my video idea is to, like, go to a highly populated area in Tampa, like a food hall with the AI Pin, and just, like, talk to people about it. Like, that's my video idea, plus other ones that I'd make with it. I feel like Vision, like, no, I won't do. I'm not going to do that. I mean, I'll do it just for you. I'll do it on this podcast. When I have both on this podcast, I will wear the headset, wear the pin, and things will just be talking to me constantly.
Oh my goodness.
But no, I won't do that. I won't do that.
Okay.
So how do you, I mean, you've tried it, so what do you feel?
Yeah. Oh, well, so when I think about the Vision Pro, the piece that I feel like is really interesting is if you look back, you talked about AirPods. I think the thing that Apple did that made those a completely, like a thing people actually wanted was they were able to make them completely wireless, right? And sync together, right? That was not a thing that existed before the AirPods. That was the reason that it's like, oh, because there were wireless Bluetooth headphones and earbuds, but they all had like a wire between them, for example, or that kind of thing.
Right.
So the AirPods were really the first example of these are Bluetooth. They're completely independent. You can just use one of them, and when that one dies, you can switch and put the other one in. Like that was what changed it. The same thing if you think about like the iPhone. The thing that made the iPhone a device people would use was the multi-touch display, because touch displays sucked before that. And so there would be no iPhone without like that sort of a thing. So when you look at the Vision Pro, I think that the piece that Apple has done, no one has done before. The gestures, I guess, is a pretty important piece of it. Like they're very intuitive, right? You just look with your eye, and whatever you're looking at with your eye, it selects, and then you just pinch with your fingers to like actually select that thing. So that's a piece no one else has gotten right. Meta does not do that like that, right? And even the new Quest does not have the same quality of displays, right? Apple is willing to put a display in front of you, and they've mastered sort of the pass-through video. So I just wanted to say that's the piece that makes the Apple Vision Pro, I think, different than other headsets in the way that the AirPods were different than other Bluetooth, the way that the phone is different than other smartphones before that. So that I think that's an important thing to understand. And using it, so yeah, I was at WWDC, had a chance to use it. I could envision sitting here in my office and using it to do certain work, especially certain collaborative things. I don't think I would just sit here and write. That would be strange and a little bit overkill, right? But
you could be writing like in the mountains, though, sitting at a lake.
I could. Actually, you know what? That's not a terrible idea, because sometimes when you have to be creative, you just want to get away. So I'm not discounting that piece of it. But I think like for research, for certain types of work, one of the pieces that didn't feel fully fleshed out at the time was sort of the FaceTime call type piece where you look like an avatar-ish version
digital
of yourself.
Persona?
Yeah, sort of. Yeah. You're sort of like floating in the air kind of a thing, but you're in a space together. It's not quite like Horizons, Workrooms, that kind of thing. Excuse me. But I could definitely see that, because I hate Zoom calls. I hate that sort of thing. And I could see it as being a better way of doing that. But I do think, at least in the nearest term, entertainment will be the killer app, especially if they can deliver on some of the things that they are sort of promising, like their partnerships with Disney and ESPN, that sort of thing, like being able to experience maybe the Star Wars area at the Magic Kingdom without actually going to like those types of things. I feel like people would be willing to justify something that is expensive, and they're more conducive to doing them when you're by yourself, as opposed to like, no one wants to sit in a cubicle in a room with 300 other people wearing Vision Pro. That feels very dystopian.
It feels dystopian. I will say my brother-in-law and his wife were in town over the holidays, and he produces music, and so he works in Logic and Pro Tools doing that. They actually had, like, this is, again, how much of a bubble sometimes it is. They had not heard of Vision Pro yet. They didn't know Apple was making a headset, which I find fascinating, like, just fascinating. But I was explaining to him, like, basically this kind of workflow. And right now, if you go watch youtube.com/@primarytechshow, we're showing visuals the entire time. Yeah. This is like the moment when there's a guy working at a desk, and he's got 3 windows open, kind of large, and he can look all around and use a keyboard and mouse like he would controlling his Mac. And I was telling him, like, you can make these windows as big as you want. And for, like, a music producer, one of the challenges is you want the biggest display possible so you can see as many tracks as possible. If you're editing, producing music or whatever, you might have hundreds of tracks, orchestras. You might have tons of instruments. Yep. And you're always going to be limited, or previously, by the physical monitor that you're running Logic Pro 10 on or Pro Tools or whatever. And so now, like, you could literally make that as big as you want. Like, make it 10 feet tall and see, 100 tracks all at once. I assume, I don't know if you could speak from your experience with it, like, I assume once you size a window in the Apple Vision Pro, like in augmented reality, that if you, like, step forward to it, it gets bigger. Is that, or does the window like move with you? Do you remember
No,
how that works?
it's like it has object permanence in that virtual space. So yeah, that would be true. Like if you had put up, what we're looking at now, if you were watching the video, is someone standing at a table. But if that table wasn't there and that person decided to walk forward, it would be as though you're walking. In the example there was a part of the demo where they had the wall. We were sitting in a room, and the wall at the other end of the room opened up, and a dinosaur came into the room, which was very visceral, let me tell you. And then they're like, get up and go see the dinosaur. And I'm like, I'm good. But I did, right? And it was as if I was getting closer to it. It wasn't like it moved away from me.
So, I could see, like a music producer just have a massive window with hundreds of tracks with you don't need a desk or chair, or maybe just have a chair that you can like throw back dramatically and then walk up to this, huge window of Logic Pro 10 and like inspect the tracks closely, like which would normally be like a Command plus, maybe you want to zoom in on the timeline or whatever. But I'm sure there would be people that would like to just physically like go to the track that I want to edit, like walk to it, swipe up to it, and then, see it as big as you want. Like hold your face right up against the quote unquote digital window and make the edits. Like maybe that's compelling. For some, there's like the mechanic or repair type use cases where like maybe repair people, whether it's aviation or cars, like you could wear this and there would be apps where augmented reality could show you like unscrew this first. And it gives you that step-by-step, or like IKEA furniture. Build IKEA furniture with Apple Vision Pro, and you can literally like it will point to where you put the little wooden dowel in the hole.
Yep.
You don't have to wonder if this is right. Like some of those just like normal use cases that we had paper manuals for or whatever, it might change that. So I don't know. I'm excited.
No, I think it'll be very interesting to see how people use it, but I do think that it will have. I think because they have done the technology so well that as long as the software is available for whatever use case you care the most about, like you're going to want to try this.
Yeah.
I think that people are going to. Is it worth $3,500? That's really tough to say because that is a lot of money, like a lot of real money for a lot of people. But I think that
was the golden Apple Watch worth $10,000?
No, but most people didn't. Although that just became obsolete, they won't even repair it anymore. Like that happened last year. True. That was sad for people. Anyway, it was only sad for some people who were so rich that they don't even know where that Apple Watch is anymore.
They don't know. They weren't wearing it.
Anyway.
My last question on Vision Pro. Since the 17.2 update, if you have a 15 Pro or Pro Max, you can capture spatial video right now to view in the Vision Pro when it comes out. Have you been capturing spatial video?
So I did some on Christmas morning. I thought... it was like,
Same.
I should. And actually, you helped me because I had no idea how to make it happen. I'm like, I opened the camera. Listen, I'm a tech columnist. I'm a pretty smart person, but I'm also very impatient. So I don't always have the patience to dig and figure out where something would be. So I usually just like search for it or check Steven's Twitter, Threads account because he's usually come up with a tip for it. And I'm like, how do I even do this? And I have to turn it on. And once I turn it on, it just gives you that option. So I did on Christmas morning. I recorded some of that because I was trying to think like, is there a thing that's happening in my life right now I will care about enough later to watch back in spatial video? And Christmas morning seemed like it would be that moment. I wish I would have thought about it. Actually, it wasn't out when we were in Florida for Thanksgiving, so I wouldn't have been able to do it then anyway. So,
right. I did the exact same thing. When my kids were opening some gifts, I captured some spatial video, like a minute or two, and I'm just very curious how that's going to feel in the headset. And I'm curious if there's going to be like a wave of like, man, I wish I've had this for years because I would have loved to experience other memories in this kind of VR space, or if it's going to be like, this is like those weird, I don't know if you remember HTC made like 3D phones where you could capture 3D video and then actually display it on the phone, but it was like the worst 3D ever, which I doubt. No, this will not be like that.
Right.
But I'm just curious what that visceral reaction is going to be. Like do I feel like I was there again? Like, do I feel like I'm literally living this memory again, like a dream, or will it be? I don't know. I'm curious to see.
That was a part of the demo, right? They did a couple of those.
Right.
The one thing I think that people might, I don't know if people think of it this way or not, but when imagine you'd open your Photos app, right? And you click on the video and it's a spatial video. So it is still confined to like a window, right? It is not like a panoramic surround. It's not like you're standing in the middle of that. You can't like navigate around your spatial media.
Right.
But you are watching something that has depth, and it was a little hard to tell because the ones that we were watching were obviously not things we cared about. You know, it's some people around a campfire or that kind of thing. It was like, maybe, was it Alicia Keys in a music studio? Maybe was one of them.
Oh.
I know it was in a music studio. I think it was Alicia Keys. And it was like you were there. It was like,
Sure.
and it was sort of like, wow. I mean, I'm not emotionally gripped by this because I don't know who these kids are at this campfire. You know, there was the birthday party scene was the other one, but I could imagine like if that was that's pretty amazing. So
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm excited. We'll see. We'll obviously talk about it here on the show if we have an event or anything. And, Jason gets invited to these things. So maybe by proxy I will too one day, but at least you get to go.
We're working on it. I'm working on it.
We're working on it. All right, one quick follow-up and then a little personal tech. In our first episode, like our preview episode, we were talking about can you use an iPad as a home hub if you wanted to use Apple HomeKit. And so did the digging, and here's the Apple support article. I'll put it in the show notes. But you can-ish. So there was that HomeKit architecture upgrade with iOS 16, I believe. I think it was a dot update. And you could update the architecture of your home to be more reliable or whatever. If you did that and your smart home is now on that new architecture, which I imagine if you're starting from scratch today, it would be on that new architecture, you cannot use an iPad as a home hub. You could if you were on the older version of HomeKit that did not use that new architecture. So that's the caveat. I think basically going forward, Apple does not want you to do this, and so it will not be supported as a home hub with that new, more reliable architecture. So not anymore seems to be the answer.
Okay, so quick question. How do I know if I'm on the new? Because none of the stuff in my house is reliable. Just to be clear.
No, wait a minute.
Right now it says seven accessories, no response. That's what it says.
Let me see where mine is. I'm only 2 accessories, no response, and 1 I have to change the battery. So I'm doing pretty well right now. But I really have no idea. I think if you go to the home settings and you go to the software update, if you don't see the architecture update there, probably means you're on the new architecture.
Okay, we're on the new one.
If you see the update, that's where it would prompt you to do it. But there's no like obvious new in red letters or whatever. Like,
right.
It's not
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, no. In the one of the devices that never respond. We don't have to talk about this for very long, but I will have questions someday. Is the I won't say what brand because I don't want to throw them under the bus, but the front door lock that we have, which I love, but it never responds to HomeKit anymore.
Oh, that
seems problematic.
That's
though.
not good.
Like it's how you get in the front door. It doesn't matter. It doesn't work.
I have a video actually reviewing the. For HomeKit. Anyway.
All right, I'll watch it.
That's
I promise. We can
no,
follow
we can talk
up.
about it on a future one too.
Yep.
We will. We're both smart home people, so we will have smart home content in the future for sure.
Absolutely.
But let's round out the show with some news, but also bring it back to a personal aspect. The Apple Store Infinite Loop, or it's the Apple Infinite Loop Store, is actually closing on January 20th. It has been around for a long time. It was Apple's initial headquarters, One Infinite Loop. It's where Jim Dalrymple, his publication called The Loop was based on this name. And it's closing. I guess it's been an Apple store recently. I have not ever had a chance to go here. Have you been to this store?
Yeah, I have. I've not only have I been there, but I have merch from there.
Oh, my goodness.
So here's the thing. I have to be clear. I've been to both this one, and I've been to the Apple Park Visitor Center, which sounds like it's a visitor center, but it's actually an Apple store at Apple Park.
Right.
And those are the only 2 stores where you can buy merch, right? So I have I have an Apple hat type thing.
So you even brought it.
I did.
Brought it to the podcast to show off.
Just because this one obviously did not come from Infinite Loop, but this is obviously from Apple Park, a T-shirt, and then I've got a couple of these pens. So anyway, I have been there.
Oh my word!
It's
envy.
I'm so sorry. Well, go now before they close. You've got 16 more days before they shut down.
I got 2 weeks. 2 weeks.
But it is. So I mean, the cool thing about it's when you walk in, it's an Apple store, like just to be clear. But
Right.
it used to be the company store. So it used to be like the employee store. And it's funny. I don't know if you've ever seen old pictures of it, but I mean, it looked like a CompUSA kind of it was like rows of software and device, and sweatshirts. And it looked like a cross between like a small CompUSA and like a college swag store, like, the bookstore kind of a thing. And so that was, and then I think it was 2015 ish, maybe they converted it to an Apple store. And then in 2017 is when they opened, I think, the Apple Park store, and it's kind of like, I think, taken maybe a backseat to it at that point, because obviously if you're going to go to Cupertino because you care about Apple, you're probably going to go to the spaceship, not to Infinite Loop. But anyway, it is a cool thing. Though. It is very cool. It is one of the two places you can get swag. And to be clear, the swag is different at the two stores, right? So if you want to have a chance to buy all the swag, you have to go to both. Now, maybe they will take the stuff from this store and put it up at the visitor center now because this will be closed. But yeah, it is pretty cool. I mean, it is kind of bittersweet that it's closing down. So
what you're saying is I need to go to CES, and then at the end of CES, hop on a little flight over to Cupertino. I've never been to Cupertino. I've never been to San Francisco. That's a place I need to go. My goal is this year, if you're listening, Apple, this year, to go to have a reason to go to Apple Park. And, they'll probably talk about it if they have like a Vision Pro thing to say, end of an era.
They might. They might, because they do sometimes talk about stores and stuff. This is actually one of two stores that is closing down this month. The other one is in Honolulu, which I did realize I've actually been to that one as well. I don't know. I mean, that one's not nearly as nostalgic, but it is. There are two that are closing. Cool. This one, though, is the one that I think people, I don't know if they should know about it, but it is the end of an era. It's kind of a cliche, but it's a big deal because there was a point in time when this was literally the only Apple merch store, official store. So. Right.
I do think it's ironic that there's no Genius Bar appointments available at can't make a Genius appointment there.
I don't even know if they have they may not even have a Genius Bar in there, to be honest. I'm not sure.
Well, now there's not even. So here's where we talk about the personal tech. Back in my day, Apple stores, there was the literal like Genius Bar, and they would have the words on the wall. And if you made an appointment, you would walk up to a bar. It was like a wooden, at least in the ones I went to, it was like a bar, and that's where you go to get your support. And now if you make a Genius Bar appointment, they check you in, and they're like, yeah, sit over there, sit at a random table.
Go stand against the back wall.
Yeah, go stand against the back wall. It's like, okay, I wish I knew there was a place to go, which I just recently heard John Syracuse talk about how he wishes there were still checkout lines at the Apple store, which there used to be. Again, like I remember. And so, okay. You had, I think, an excellent topic in here to talk about Apple stores, like our experience in Apple stores and all of that. And so I'll just say my very first experience, I grew up in upstate New York, and I didn't go to the city very often. I was in Fishkill, if you were curious. That was the town I grew up in. And the nearest Apple store was actually in Connecticut. It was the Danbury Mall Apple store. And that was like the mall that when we were in high school we would go to. That was like, it was just fun. It was a big mall. It had an Apple store, and I remember the first time going into that, it just blew my mind. Like, it was just this amazing experience. And then I spent the next summers during college still in New York, actually interning in the city, and I became completely spoiled by Apple stores. I would literally, as when I interned at my job, it was an insurance company over the summer, I would take the subway at lunch. I had an hour, and I timed it perfectly. I could get down to the subway, get to the Apple store on Prince Street in Soho, which was an amazing store. It was 2 stories, 2-story Apple store. The upper story had a theater. It literally had like 5 or 6 rows of theater seating with a huge screen. And I think they've remodeled it since. But it was just an incredible Apple store. I loved going there just to look around, just to walk around. The very first Apple product I ever bought was in that store, and it was an iPod video. That was my first ever Apple product. And then later that summer, I bought a G4 12-inch PowerBook. That was my second Apple product and my first Mac. But then being in New York around that time and in the years subsequent, I was spoiled by like Fifth Avenue Apple Store opened, the Cube. And so I definitely visited that. That's awesome, just architecturally or whatever. The Grand Central Station Apple Store, which is just a wild experience, also beautiful, has the amazing architecture of Grand Central Station or whatever. Like, those are like my Apple stores kind of as I came into the Apple world, and they were all wonderful. And now I go to the Brandon, Florida Apple Store, which is like whenever I post pictures of it, people are like, "That thing's tiny. Where are you? Like, what Apple Store is this?" It is literally one of the smallest Apple stores. It's like been around for a while. It's not updated, and it kind of stinks that that's my local Apple Store. But you know, that's what it is. But anyway, but the ones I grew up in New York were amazing.
Yeah. Well, I think the very first Apple Store I ever went to was the one at Fashion Valley Mall in San Diego, because I live in Michigan and not in New York. When I don't even know when the first Apple Store in Michigan opened. The first one I remember being able to go to is the one in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and it was probably similar to what you're talking about. It was very small. It's still small, but it was like one of the, if you think of them in terms of like the smallest unit, right, which is basically 2 tables down the middle and then the things along the edge. That's, I think, the smallest unit, and that's what it used to be.
That's
now
the Brandon, Florida Apple Store.
So now I think it's twice that size, which is still fairly small, but it has expanded since then. That was the first one, and the Fashion Valley one is probably pretty similar. I don't actually have any recollection except for going in there and being like, "This is amazing," right? Like, it was just such a cool thing to me to be able to go there for the first time. And this was like sometime in the early 2000s. I don't exactly remember when, but I would say my favorite period of time for the
that's the Apple Vision. But just by the way, real quick, so this is the Fashion Valley Apple Store.
Okay,
here's a picture if you're watching.
It probably didn't look like that 20 years ago. Whatever. But yes, right. That is it now, and that's so even that's what I would call like twice the size, and it's a lot. So that's probably 2 to 3 times bigger than the original Grand Rapids one that I used to go to. So,
right. But I just want to show this one.
Oh yeah,
this is the Soho Apple Store. I guess it used to be United States Post Office.
Yeah.
But this is the store, and you could kind of see through the window that glass staircase going up to the second floor, and it was just wonderful. I love that Apple Store.
Yeah, so I think that the golden age of Apple stores was probably pre-Angela Ahrens, not saying anything bad about her, but when they started to make some changes and remodeling them, because you used to have like the Chicago Michigan Avenue store, which was similar to what you described, where it had the theater upstairs, and it felt like a theater, right? Like, it actually felt like you were in a theater, because they had chairs that kind of, and seating, and then the floor went down, and then there's a person standing in front of a big screen. The San Francisco store was just like that as well, the flagship store. The new San Francisco store is great. The new Michigan Avenue Chicago store is great. It's right down on the river. The problem is now, like, the theater is just like a bunch of wooden boxes like on the floor that you can like sort of come and sit on, and there's like a screen and stuff. It just doesn't have the same kind of feel. And I'm sure that someone at Apple feels like they're way better. But I do think that we may be post golden era Apple store, except you described the Soho store as being, it was an old post office. Apple has done that. Like the Tower Theater in Los Angeles is another example of where they renovated something very cool. I've been to the Pasig de Gracia, which is the store in Barcelona, which is another one that they, kind of took over a building that already existed and renovated it. And I do think that like those are so cool that they will restore these buildings and they will give new life to them. And they obviously, it looks very much like an Apple store, but it also still very much maintains the character of those original buildings.
Yes.
So with the exception of those flagships, I do think that I have a lot of nostalgia for some of the older styles of some of the stores. So
yes, this is the Tower Theater one. They respect the architecture, just like the Grand Central Station store. They just respect what the building is, and they kind of build around and into it. And it looks beautiful. Like any other brand, I feel like would probably ruin it. Let's be honest.
Probably.
Are there still Microsoft stores? Do they still do that?
No, they closed the last ones. Nope, those closed a little while ago. Okay. That was, you tried to copy this thing, but no, nobody cared.
But no. Well, that's our Apple Store nostalgia. That was pretty fun. And so that's our personal take at the end. So we're going to go into some quick bonus episode in which we're going to talk about how we met and naming the show, which was a challenge. But before we go, we want to let you know to get access to those bonus episodes, you can support us directly in Apple Podcasts. That subscription is live. Plus, you can get an ad-free version of the show as well if you would like. $5 a month, $50 a year in Apple Podcast. And through Memberful, you can go to primarytech.fm and do it that way if you want to get that RSS feed there. And I just want to say, I believe in podcasting, which I meant that to be like a Godfather reference where they say, I believe in America at the beginning.
Okay, but wait, do you know what the next sentence of that reference is?
I don't.
Do you know the next sentence of
What is
that
the next one?
reference? Which makes it even funnier because you were just talking about supporting this podcast, because the reference is I believe in America, and I do believe that the next sentence is something like it's in America that I made my fortune or something like that. So like the reference, I believe in
That's
podcasting.
perfect.
Podcasting is where I made my fortune. I butchered the exact quote,
Well,
but that's basically what it is.
That's hilarious. Well, I do not expect a fortune, but I will say, like, when you look at the landscape of podcasts, many are like based on a network or come from like another publication, and this is like we are complete. Like it's me and Jason here. There's no one else. Like
This
we
is
are
true.
doing it.
This is all you get.
There's no. Not even working. There's no like. Not even working with an ad agency yet. Like we worked with our Audio Hijack directly, and so supporting the show would be a huge deal. If you listen to the ATP podcast, they talk about this a lot. But going into the future, I think advertising and podcasting will still be around, but direct support from people who love and watch and listen to the show is going to be a big deal. And so we would love your support. We would really appreciate it. We have bonus episodes now as part of that, and of course, ad-free versions of the show. Maybe there'll be more benefits in the future. We'll see what people want or what people ask for. But yeah, that's so support the show. Those links will be down in the podcast show notes, and we really appreciate it. And of course, 5-star rating. If you've not, this is a new show, so any 5-star ratings you can give would be greatly appreciated, both in Apple Podcasts and in Spotify. You can do 5 stars and reviews, and we really appreciate it. Excited to do this new show. Just want to say thank you, Jason, for doing this with me. It's a lot of
Hey,
fun.
listen, I appreciate it. I feel a lot of pressure because I've said many times that Steven is the most podcasting person I know. And so doing a podcast on a regular basis with Steven, there's a lot of pressure here. I was super excited that I felt like I was super productive and did a little bit of research ahead of time because I was just like, one of these days, Steven's going to just feel like, I got to cut the dead weight, man.
No, man, no. And we'll talk about this in the bonus episode in a second, but it was a lot of fun. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. YouTube.com/@PrimaryTechShow. You can watch the show there. We'll publish video version there and audio. And thanks for listening. We'll be back next week. Every Thursday, we'll have a new episode out. And thanks again. This has been Primary Technology.